Welcome to the Red Thread Stories. Today, I have 3 stories about the quiet horrors we ignore in everyday Indian lives. Stories that were shared with me privately, often hesitantly, and usually followed by the same sentence. I don't know if this even counts as abuse. The first story came from a woman who thought she was overreacting. The second came from a man who was told he was becoming weak. And the third came from someone who almost didn't survive long enough to tell it. Let's begin. This story was shared with me by Neha, a 29-year-old woman from Pune, and what stayed with me wasn't one specific incident, but how ordinary everything sounded when she described it. She told me that when she got married, everyone said she was lucky because her in-laws were educated, polite, and modern. The kind of family that smiles warmly, insists you call them mummy and papa, and makes guests feel welcome, which is why it took her so long to realize that something was wrong. In the beginning, her mother-in-law would tell her not to do too much work, saying she was new to the house and should rest. But slowly, those comments changed, because resting became laziness, asking questions became disrespect. And one day she found herself being told exactly when to wake up, what to wear at home, and how often she should visit her own parents. Her husband never saw these moments the way she did, because to him they weren't moments at all, just harmless comments. And whenever she tried to explain how suffocated she felt being watched constantly, corrected constantly, and reminded that this was no longer her house, he would sigh and tell her she was thinking too much, that his mother didn't mean anything by it. The control slipped in quietly, through phone checks disguised as concern, through salary discussions that slowly turned into expectations, through clothes that suddenly became too modern for a married woman, and through visits to her parents that now required explanations. The moment that broke something inside her didn't involve shouting or violence. It happened one afternoon when she calmly said she felt suffocated, and her mother-in-law laughed and said, "This isn't suffocation, beta, this is marriage, you'll get used to it." And that's when Neha realized something deeply unsettling. No one in that house thought she was being mistreated. They thought she was being prepared. When she finished telling me this, she paused and said something that I've heard many times since. She said, "But maybe I'm lucky, at least nobody hit me." And that sentence stayed with me because it reveals how low the bar has been set. Because for every woman being told to adjust quietly, there's often a man being taught exactly when not to speak. This second story was shared by Rohit, a 34-year-old software engineer from Bangalore, and he didn't reach out because he felt like a victim. He reached out because he was tired of feeling ashamed for supporting his wife. He told me that he never thought standing up for his wife would become a problem until the first time he did it publicly, during a family gathering, when a comment was made about her character and he said it wasn't appropriate, which was enough to change the mood of the entire room. That night, his father told him he had changed after marriage. His mother cried and asked what she had done wrong raising him, and relatives joked that his wife had him under control, all said lightly, as if humiliation somehow becomes acceptable when it's wrapped in laughter. Over time, the rules became clear to him without anyone ever saying them directly. A good husband listens to his wife, but a good son never takes her side, and a real man keeps peace even if that peace requires silence. What troubled him most wasn't just his family's reaction, but the moments when he caught himself wishing his wife would stay quiet just to make life easier, and the guilt that followed those thoughts. He told me that's when he realized patriarchy doesn't just hurt women, it punishes men who refuse to benefit from it, and no one prepares you for how isolating it feels to do the right thing when approval is taken away. While Rohit's story made me think about silence, the third story made me think about what happens when silence is rewarded for too long. Because when cruelty becomes routine and protection disappears, things don't escalate suddenly. They escalate quietly. This story was shared by Meera, a woman from a small town near Indore, and she asked me not to use her real name, which should already tell you how afraid she still is. She told me that in her husband's house, pain had rules, and those rules depended entirely on who was watching. Her husband worked late most days, and over time she realized that the worst moments always happened when he wasn't home, because her mother-in-law never lost control. She was precise, deliberate, and careful in the way she hurt her, using just enough force to cause pain, but not enough to leave marks that lasted. At first it was gripping her arm hard enough to leave bruises that faded in time. Then it became slaps framed as discipline, and eventually punishments that didn't leave visible injuries at all, like being woken up before sunrise to redo housework, being denied food for small mistakes, and being locked in her room just long enough to understand it could happen again. The first time she told her husband, he said he couldn't imagine his mother doing such a thing. The second time he suggested she might be misunderstanding her intentions, and the third time he told her not to provoke her because peace in the house mattered more than details. After that, she stopped speaking. During one festival, when guests were in the house and everything had to look perfect, her mother-in-law poured hot dal on her hand because she served it incorrectly, and when she cried out in pain, she was told to be quiet because people were sitting in the living room. Later that night, when her husband noticed the burn, his mother laughed and said she was clumsy, and he nodded, not because he believed it completely, but because believing anything else would require him to act. That nod stayed with her longer than the burn. She tried leaving once and went to her parents' house, but when families got involved, everything was labeled a misunderstanding, an adjustment issue, and when she went to the police, they asked where the marks were now, because stories don't matter without evidence. She was sent back. This time the abuse became more systematic, with food withheld deliberately, threats made quietly, doors locked at night, and warnings that if she spoke again, they would say she was mentally unstable. When she finally collapsed, neighbors heard shouting, not hers, but her mother-in-law's voice telling everyone she had fallen on her own. She survived, and people still tell her, "At least you're alive," as if survival was the goal and dignity was optional. These stories don't feel shocking because we've grown up hearing versions of them all our lives. They don't sound extreme. They sound familiar, and that's what makes them dangerous. If any part of this episode felt uncomfortably close to home, you're not alone, and you're not imagining it. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the most. This was the Red Thread Stories, and this thread continues.